One cold detail about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey has been bothering me ever since the trailer dropped, and the more I think about it, the stranger this entire project starts to feel. I love historical epics more than almost any genre in cinema. Give me massive kingdoms, exhausted warriors, impossible journeys, giant ships cutting through violent oceans, and heroes trying to crawl back home after surviving hell itself, and I am immediately invested. There is something timeless about those old swords and sandal stories because they are not just about battles. They are about pride, temptation, loneliness, revenge, faith, and the terrifying distance between human beings and gods. That is exactly why The Odyssey should have been one of my most anticipated films of the decade. On paper, it sounds unbeatable. Christopher Nolan directing one of the greatest adventure stories ever written should feel like cinematic destiny. But after watching that trailer multiple times, reading more about the production, and looking closely at the creative choices behind it, I cannot shake this weird feeling in my gut. Instead of excitement, I felt distance. Instead of wonder, I felt calculation. And honestly, that reaction surprised even me because I wanted to love this thing so badly. The first crack appeared when I learned which version of Homer's story Nolan was reportedly using as his primary inspiration. Emily Wilson's 2017 translation has become incredibly popular in literary circles, and I completely understand why many readers admire it. It is modern, accessible, and intentionally different from older translations that focused heavily on grandeur and mythic masculinity. But that is also exactly where my concern begins. Wilson openly approached the text through a modern ideological lens, especially regarding gender and power dynamics. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong with reinterpretation. Every generation re-examines classic stories. The problem is that The Odyssey is not just another novel. It is one of the foundational adventure epics of Western storytelling. Odysseus is supposed to feel larger than life, flawed yet legendary. A man crushed by temptation, war, ego, and destiny. My fear is that this adaptation might become less interested in mythic heroism and more interested in dissecting it through contemporary political frameworks. When filmmakers start treating ancient stories like social essays instead of emotional legends, something important usually disappears. The soul gets replaced by commentary, and audiences can feel that emptiness immediately. Then came the casting announcements, and honestly, that was the moment my confidence started collapsing even further. Matt Damon as Odysseus actually makes sense to me. He has the exhausted intelligence and emotional weariness needed for a king trying to survive impossible odds. Anne Hathaway also feels believable in this world because she carries herself with a kind of classic elegance that fits mythological storytelling. But then, other names started appearing, and suddenly, the illusion broke apart. Zendaya reportedly playing Athena completely threw me out of the atmosphere. I know she is massively popular right now, and Hollywood clearly sees her as the face of an entire generation, but that is exactly the issue. When I look at Athena, I should see an ancient divine force guiding fate itself. Instead, my brain immediately sees celebrity branding, magazine covers, red carpets, and modern internet culture. The same problem appears with some of the rumored supporting cast choices. It starts feeling less like ancient Greece and more like a studio desperately assembling the most algorithm-friendly lineup possible. Epic storytelling depends heavily on immersion, and once audiences become too aware of celebrity presence, the mythology starts collapsing in real time. What made the trailer even more confusing was how visually ordinary everything looked. I genuinely expected Nolan to deliver overwhelming scale because that is usually where he excels. Interstellar felt cosmic. Dunkirk felt suffocating. Oppenheimer felt apocalyptic even during quiet conversations, but the Odyssey trailer looked strangely muted, almost cautious. The costumes appeared oddly clean and minimalistic. The lighting felt flat, and many of the environments lacked that mystical texture I associate with ancient legends. I kept waiting for a single shot that would make me feel transported into a dangerous mythological world, and it never came. Instead, many scenes looked like expensive actors wandering around rocky beaches while discussing philosophy. Maybe that realism is intentional. Maybe Nolan wants this universe grounded and psychologically intimate. But there is a very delicate balance between realism and blandness. Gladiator understood this perfectly. Troy understood it too, despite its flaws. Those films made heroes feel enormous, while still emotionally human. Here, everyone feels strangely contemporary, like people attending a prestige television costume rehearsal rather than characters whose names survive thousands of years of storytelling. That lack of grandeur matters more than people realize because mythological epics survive entirely on atmosphere. And honestly, the accents made the problem even harder for me to ignore. I know this sounds nitpicky, but accents completely shape how audiences perceive historical worlds. When everybody speaks in modern casual American rhythms, the ancient illusion weakens instantly. It becomes difficult to believe these are mythic rulers and warriors from another civilization when they sound like they could start discussing streaming subscriptions or airport security at any moment. Some viewers may argue that realistic accents are unnecessary because authenticity is impossible anyway. Fair point. But cinema has always relied on stylization to create emotional distance from everyday life. Think about Lawrence of Arabia, Braveheart, or even The Lord of the Rings. Those performances carry a theatrical rhythm that elevates the dialogue into something legendary. In Nolan's trailer, the conversations felt clipped, dry, and weirdly informal. Nobody sounded spiritually connected to God's destiny or ancient traditions. They sounded like highly educated professionals discussing strategy during a corporate retreat. Again, maybe Nolan intentionally stripped away romanticism to make the story feel immediate and grounded. But if you remove too much mythic flavor from a mythological epic, what exactly remains besides expensive historical cosplay? The more I thought about it, the more I realized my uneasiness might actually come from Nolan himself. Let me be very clear before people misunderstand me. Christopher Nolan is absolutely one of the greatest directors alive. The man practically reinvented blockbuster filmmaking multiple times. Memento, The Prestige, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Oppenheimer. These are not ordinary achievements. He is obsessed with structure, time, memory, obsession, sacrifice, and intellectual tension. But that specific brilliance may also be why I am nervous about him handling the Odyssey. Homer's story is not only about strategy and survival, it is deeply emotional, spiritual, seductive, tragic, and sometimes even bizarre. Odysseus cries constantly in the original text. He longs for home. He fears death. He falls into temptation. He encounters monsters, witches, gods, hallucinations, and overwhelming loneliness. The Odyssey needs dirt, sweat, madness, lust, terror, and aching humanity. Nolan often approaches stories like intricate machines, and sometimes his films can feel emotionally distant even when technically brilliant. I worry he may focus more on the puzzle of Odysseus than the soul of Odysseus, and that difference could determine whether this film becomes immortal or merely impressive. Another strange thing happened after the trailer released. I noticed that many early reactions online were not discussing the emotional weight of the story at all. Instead, conversations immediately shifted toward discourse. People debated representation, ideological interpretation, modern relevance, and casting symbolism before they even discussed adventure or tragedy. That instantly raised another red flag for me because truly, great epics usually unite audiences through emotional immersion first. Politics and analysis come later. When the cultural conversation surrounding a film begins with modern identity debates instead of storytelling excitement, it often means the marketing itself is emphasizing contemporary messaging over timeless myth. I could absolutely be wrong here, and I genuinely hope I am. But I have seen this pattern before with several major franchises during the last decade. Studios increasingly treat ancient stories as opportunities to update audiences on present-day ideological priorities. The result is usually a film trapped between two worlds. It neither fully embraces classical mythology nor fully commits to modern satire. Instead, it becomes a cautious compromise trying desperately not to offend anyone. And compromise is poison for epics. The greatest historical adventures feel fearless. They choose a tone, commit completely, and drag audiences into another reality without constantly reminding them of current political conversations happening outside the theater. At the same time, I cannot deny there are moments where Nolan's version still fascinates me. A few shots in the trailer genuinely lingered in my mind. There is one image of a battered ship floating through black storm water that feels hauntingly beautiful. Another scene shows Odysseus standing alone against an endless horizon, and for a brief second I could almost feel the crushing loneliness that defines the original poem. That is what makes this whole situation frustrating instead of hopeless. The potential is obviously there. Nolan understands scale, practical filmmaking, and psychological obsession better than almost anyone. If he taps into the nightmare quality of Odysseus drifting farther from home while losing pieces of himself during every encounter, this could still become extraordinary. I also respect that Nolan is even attempting something this risky. Studios rarely finance serious mythological epics anymore because fantasy franchises dominate everything. The fact that a filmmaker with Nolan's influence is bringing Homer back into mainstream conversation is honestly exciting by itself. Maybe the trailer simply failed to capture the emotional texture of the final film. Trailers can absolutely misrepresent movies, especially when directors intentionally hide major narrative elements from audiences before release. Still, my instincts keep circling back to the same concern. Great historical epics require sincerity above everything else. They cannot feel embarrassed by mythology. They cannot constantly wink at the audience or reinterpret every ancient value through modern cynicism. The best epics believe completely in their own worlds. Look at Gladiator again. That film is melodramatic, emotional, violent, sentimental, and deeply earnest. Ridley Scott never treated Maximus like a cultural case study. He treated him like a tragic legend. That sincerity is why audiences connected so intensely with the movie. I am not fully convinced Nolan possesses that same emotional instinct. His characters often function like brilliant minds trapped inside conceptual labyrinths. Even his emotional scenes usually feel restrained and intellectualized. The Odyssey needs moments of overwhelming feeling. It needs scenes where audiences ache for Ithaca alongside Odysseus. It needs terror when gods interfere. It needs temptation when Circe appears. It needs spiritual exhaustion when the sea refuses to release him. If Nolan approaches all of this with too much clinical restraint, the movie could become visually impressive but emotionally hollow, like an expensive museum exhibit about mythology instead of living mythology itself. And maybe that is why the trailer left me with such strangely cold vibes. Nothing felt alive yet. Nobody looked consumed by obsession, grief, divine terror, or desperate longing. They mostly looked composed, controlled, intelligent, beautifully photographed, yes, but emotionally contained. Ancient epics should feel dangerous. They should feel like civilizations wrestling directly with gods, fate, violence, and mortality. The Odyssey especially should feel unpredictable because Odysseus survives through cunning while constantly stumbling into situations beyond human understanding. Instead, Nolan's footage felt almost too polished, too academically precise. I kept imagining how someone like Werner Herzog or even early Ridley Scott might approach the same material. Their worlds feel dirty, mystical, and spiritually unstable. Nolan's worlds often feel engineered. Again, that approach works brilliantly for stories involving dreams, timelines, espionage, or nuclear anxiety, but mythology operates differently. Mythology breathes through irrational emotion and symbolic chaos. It thrives on atmosphere more than explanation. If Nolan over-explains the gods, rationalizes the monsters, or strips away supernatural mystery to make everything psychologically grounded, I think the entire experience could lose the haunting power that made Homer's story survive for centuries in the first place. But here's the part where I have to be fair to Nolan and fair to the film itself. Some of my anxiety probably comes from impossible expectations. The Odyssey is one of those stories that exists so deeply inside cultural imagination that no adaptation will ever satisfy everyone. Some people want pure mythology. Others want historical realism. Some want philosophical depth. Others want giant monsters and spectacle. Nolan is walking into a minefield where every creative choice will disappoint somebody. And despite all my concerns, I cannot pretend I am not going to watch this movie opening weekend. Of course I am. Because even a flawed adaptation of the Odyssey, directed by Christopher Nolan, is still one of the most fascinating cinematic gambles in years. Maybe the film will completely surprise me. Maybe Zendaya will deliver an unforgettable Athena. Maybe Nolan will finally unleash a level of raw emotion we have never seen from him before. I honestly hope that happens because I desperately want modern Hollywood to rediscover sincere historical epics again. Right now, though, based purely on the trailer and the creative direction surrounding the project, I cannot ignore the uneasy feeling that this version of the Odyssey may end up too modern to feel timeless and too intellectual to feel mythic. But maybe that uncertainty is exactly why everyone is talking about it already. One detail that keeps haunting me is how differently older epics treated silence and mystery. In classics like Ben-Hur or even Kingdom of Heaven's director's cut, characters often pause long enough for the world around them to breathe. You felt the weight of history pressing against every conversation. In Nolan's trailer, everything moves with his familiar momentum, sharp edits, urgent music, constant forward motion, and that style undeniably creates tension, but I wonder whether it leaves enough room for awe. The Odyssey should occasionally feel hypnotic, almost dreamlike, as if Odysseus himself no longer understands whether he is traveling through reality or punishment crafted by angry gods. I wanted the trailer to overwhelm me with strangeness. I wanted terrifying islands, eerie prophecies, exhausted sailors losing their minds beneath impossible stars. Instead, most of what I saw felt controlled and restrained, almost intentionally grounded. Maybe Nolan is saving the madness for the full release, and honestly, that would be the smartest possible decision because surprise still matters in cinema. But trailers usually reveal a film's emotional identity, and right now this one feels more concerned with prestige than myth. That does not automatically mean failure, but it definitely explains why my excitement keeps colliding with caution whenever I think about this project, and maybe audiences will completely embrace that approach. Maybe younger viewers who never cared about Greek mythology will suddenly discover Homer through Nolan's lens and fall in love with these ancient stories again. That possibility excites me because cinema should keep reinventing classics for new generations. I just hope reinvention does not come at the cost of wonder, mystery, sincerity, and the spirit that made these legends unforgettable across centuries. Let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, like, share, and subscribe.